When I turned 18 and received my inheritance documents, I discovered my entire life was built on a lie that destroyed the wrong man. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of my childhood bedroom, casting soft shadows across the acceptance letters scattered on my desk. Harvard, Stanford, MIT, they all wanted me. But none of it mattered without the trust fund that would make it possible. At 18, I was finally old enough to access the Hartwell family inheritance, the money my great-grandfather had set aside for his descendants' education. It was supposed to be my ticket to freedom, my escape from the bitter war zone that had become my family. I adjusted the collar of my navy blazer, the one I saved for important occasions. Today felt monumental. The law offices of Sterling and Associates weren't just handling paperwork, they were handing me my future. My reflection in the mirror looked back with eyes that held my father's intelligence and my mother's stubborn determination. I had no idea that within hours, both of those inheritances would be called into question. The drive through downtown took me past the architectural firm where my father, Marcus, used to work before the divorce destroyed his partnership. I still remembered visiting him there as a child, watching him draft blueprints with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Now he lived in a modest apartment across town, our visits limited to court-approved schedules that my mother, Chloe, monitored like a prison warden. Sterling and Associates occupied the top floor of a glass tower that scraped the Denver sky. The reception area smelled of leather and expensive coffee, designed to whisper success and permanence. I gave my name to the receptionist, a woman whose smile was as polished as the marble floors. "Miss Hartwell," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like a blessing. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you." James Sterling was exactly what I expected a trust lawyer to be, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of gravitas that came from handling other people's millions. His handshake was firm, his office lined with law books that looked older than the building itself. "Congratulations on your 18th birthday, Sophie," he began, settling behind his mahogany desk. "Your great-grandfather would be proud. Yale, class of 1952, you know. Always believed education was the greatest inheritance one could leave." He pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer. "Now, there's been a recent change to our verification process. Due to some unfortunate fraud cases involving family trusts, we now require DNA confirmation for all beneficiaries. It's simply a precaution to protect the integrity of the estate." My stomach clenched. "DNA confirmation? Standard procedure," he assured me, sliding a form across the desk. "We'll need a sample from you, and we'll compare it against the DNA profile we have on file for your great-grandfather's line. Should be straightforward. The Hartwell genetic markers are quite distinctive." I signed the form with hands that had suddenly become unsteady. A cotton swab, a plastic tube, and my future hung in the balance of microscopic evidence I couldn't see or control. 2 weeks later, the call came while I was in AP Chemistry, my favorite class because it dealt in absolutes. Elements either bonded or they didn't. Reactions either occurred or they failed. There was no room for interpretation, no space for lies to hide. "Miss Hartwell?" Mr. Sterling's voice carried a note I hadn't heard before, something between confusion and concern. "I'm afraid we need to discuss your test results. Could you come in this afternoon?" The chemistry lab suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. I gathered my books with mechanical precision, my mind already running calculations, trying to solve an equation I didn't yet understand. The second visit to Sterling and Associates felt different. The marble floors that had whispered success now echoed with the hollow sound of my footsteps. Mr. Sterling's smile was gone, replaced by the careful neutrality of a man delivering bad news. "Sophie," he began, and the absence of my surname felt like the first shoe dropping. "The DNA results are unexpected. According to our analysis, you share no genetic markers with the Hartwell family line." The words hung in the air like a chemical reaction frozen mid-process. "That's impossible," I said, my voice sounding distant and strange. "My father is Marcus Hartwell. My grandfather was James Hartwell. I've seen the family photos, the birth certificates." Mr. Sterling opened the folder again, pulling out a chart that looked like a family tree drawn in red ink. "The DNA doesn't lie, Sophie. You are not biologically related to any member of the Hartwell family. Which means. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You are not eligible for the trust fund. I stared at the chart, at the empty space where my name should have connected to the family line. Everything I had planned, everything I had counted on, evaporated in the clinical language of genetic science. There must be some mistake. We ran the test twice, he said gently. I'm very sorry, Sophie. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I left the office in a daze, the acceptance letters in my backpack now worthless pieces of paper. The drive home passed in a blur of questions that seemed to multiply with every mile. If Marcus wasn't my biological father, then who was? And why had my mother let him sacrifice everything in a divorce fighting for a daughter who wasn't even his? The house I grew up in sat on a tree-lined street that reeked of upper-middle-class success. Every lawn was perfectly manicured, every car in every driveway was less than 3 years old. It was the kind of neighborhood where secrets stayed buried under layers of social politeness and property values. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in, preparing dinner with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything. Chloe Hartwell, though apparently that name was as much a lie as everything else, was 45 but looked younger, maintained by yoga classes and expensive skincare. She had built her post-divorce life around being the wronged woman, the devoted mother, the victim of Marcus's supposed betrayals. How did the meeting go? She asked without looking up from the cutting board. Is everything settled with the trust? I sat at the kitchen island, the same spot where I had done homework for years, where she had helped me with college applications, where we had planned my future on money that was never mine to begin with. There's no trust fund, I said quietly. The DNA test showed I'm not a Hartwell. The knife in her hand stopped moving. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic from the street. Then she set the knife down with trembling fingers and turned to face me. Sophie, she began, but her voice cracked on my name. If Marcus isn't my biological father, I continued, my voice gaining strength, then who is? And why did you let him lose everything fighting for custody of a daughter who isn't his? The color drained from her face, leaving her looking older than I had ever seen her. She sank into the chair across from me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. You have to understand, she whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt anyone. The story came out in fragments, like a confession being torn from her piece by piece. 19 years ago, she had worked as a program coordinator at the Vale Foundation, a children's charity run by Dr. Harrison Vale. He was charismatic, powerful, married with a family, but he had made her feel special. Important. The affair lasted 3 months. When I found out I was pregnant, she continued, her voice barely audible, I told him. He said it would destroy his reputation, his family, his work with children. He offered me money to disappear, to never contact him again. A severance package, he called it, like I was just another employee being let go. And Marcus? Her face crumpled. I had been dating Marcus for 6 months. He was so good, so decent. When I told him I was pregnant, he was thrilled. He never questioned the timing, never asked for tests. He just loved us both. Completely. I felt something cold and hard forming in my chest, a crystalline structure of betrayal and rage. So you let him believe I was his daughter. You let him pay child support, fight for custody, lose his business, his house, his life, all for a lie. I thought I was protecting everyone, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Harrison would have destroyed me if I had told the truth. And Marcus loved you so much, Sophie. From the moment you were born, he was your father in every way that mattered. But it hadn't mattered to the courts. It hadn't mattered when the judge awarded her primary custody and ordered Marcus to pay support that consumed half his income. It hadn't mattered when his business partners, uncomfortable with the ugly divorce proceedings, bought him out for a fraction of what his stake was worth. It hadn't mattered when he had to sell the house where I had taken my first steps, said my first words, learned to ride a bike. Where is Dr. Vale now? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She looked up, startled by the calmness in my tone. Sophie, you can't contact him. He made it very clear what would happen if. Where is he? She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from the Denver Post. The headline read, "Local philanthropist Dr. Harrison Vale nominated for humanitarian award." The photo showed a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, shaking hands with children at a charity event. The caption identified him as the founder and director of the Vale Foundation, dedicated to helping disadvantaged youth. I studied the photo, searching for any resemblance, any hint of shared DNA. He looked like success personified, like a man who had never made a mistake or hurt anyone in his perfectly curated life. "He's up for a major humanitarian award next month," my mother said quietly. "The ceremony is at the downtown Marriott. It's supposed to bring in millions in new funding for the foundation." I looked at her, this woman who had shaped my life with her lies and her fears, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, the betrayal still burned, but underneath it was something colder and more focused. "I need to see Marcus," I said, standing up from the table. "Sophie, wait. Let me explain." "You've had 18 years to explain," I said, walking toward the door. "I think I've heard enough." Marcus lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a complex that had seen better decades. The paint was fading, the parking lot was cracked, but it was clean and maintained. It was the kind of place where people lived when they were rebuilding, when they were making the best of circumstances beyond their control. I knocked on the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't seen him in 3 months, not since the awkward court-supervised lunch where my mother had timed our meal to the minute. When the door opened, his face went through a progression of emotions: surprise, joy, and then concern. "Sophie, is everything okay? Your mother didn't. Can I come in?" His apartment was sparse but organized, decorated with photos of me from over the years. My kindergarten graduation, my first science fair, my soccer team photos. The entire chronicle of my childhood was there, displayed like a shrine to a relationship that had been artificially constrained by custody agreements and bitter ex-wives. I sat on his couch, a piece of furniture that had once been in our family room before the divorce lawyers divided up our lives. "Dad," I began, then stopped. The word felt different now, weighted with new meaning. "What is it, sweetheart? You look upset." The story poured out of me: the trust fund, the DNA test, my mother's confession. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face grave but not surprised. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like a chasm I was afraid to cross. "You knew," I said finally. He sighed, leaning forward in his chair. "I suspected. Not at first, but as you got older, little things didn't add up. The timing, mostly. But I made a choice, Sophie. I chose to be your father. DNA doesn't change 18 years of loving someone. But the divorce, the custody battle, everything you lost." "I lost a marriage that was already over," he said firmly. "I lost a business partnership with people who cared more about appearances than loyalty. I lost a house full of things that could be replaced. But I never lost you, Sophie. Even when I could only see you twice a month, even when your mother monitored every phone call, you were always my daughter." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "But you paid for everything. The child support, the private school, the college fund that doesn't exist anymore. You sacrificed your whole life for a lie." His expression hardened, but not with anger directed at me. "Your mother was protecting herself the only way she knew how. But this Dr. Vale." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "He made choices too. He chose to abandon his responsibility, to let another man pay the price for his actions." "I want to meet him," I said. Marcus turned around, studying my face with the same careful attention he used to give his blueprints. "Why?" "Because he needs to know that his choices have consequences. Because he built his reputation on helping children while abandoning his own. Because," my voice broke. "Because you deserve better than this." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he walked over and sat beside me on the couch. "If you're determined to do this, you're not doing it alone. But Sophie, we do this the right way. We do this smart." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I became co-conspirators in an investigation that consumed all of our free time. He approached it like an engineering problem, breaking it down into components that could be analyzed and solved. I approached it like a chemistry experiment, gathering data and testing hypotheses. The Vail Foundation's website was a masterpiece of public relations. Photos of smiling children, testimonials from grateful families, financial reports that showed millions in donations helping disadvantaged youth across Colorado. Dr. Harrison Vail was presented as a selfless advocate, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting children who had nowhere else to turn. But I had learned to read between the lines, to look for the spaces where truth hid from public view. The foundation's tax filings were public record, and they told a different story. Administrative costs consumed nearly 60% of donations. Dr. Vail's salary was listed at $400,000 per year, plus benefits and a generous expense account. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to his laptop screen. We were sitting in his apartment, surrounded by printouts and notebooks filled with our research. The foundation owns a retreat center in Aspen. According to the tax filings, it's used for donor cultivation and strategic planning. But look at the calendar on their website. It's booked for private events almost every weekend. I leaned over to see the screen. The retreat center looked like something from a luxury magazine: mountain views, hot tubs, gourmet kitchen, accommodation for 12 guests. It was the kind of place where wealthy people went to feel good about their charity while enjoying world-class amenities. "He's living like a king on money meant for children," I said, feeling that familiar cold anger crystallize in my chest. "It gets worse," Marcus replied, opening another browser tab. "I've been tracking the foundation's actual programs. They run 3 after-school centers in Denver, serving about 200 kids total. Based on their budget, that's about $15,000 per child per year. The public school system serves meals and provides tutoring for less than $2,000 per child." The numbers painted a clear picture. Dr. Harrison Vail had built a charity empire that enriched himself while providing minimal actual help to the children he claimed to serve. It was legal, technically, but it was a betrayal of every donor who thought their money was feeding hungry kids or providing safe spaces for learning. "I want to volunteer there," I said. Marcus looked at me sharply. "Sophie, that's dangerous. If he recognizes you, he's never seen me. And I look more like Mom than either of you. Besides, what 18-year-old applies to volunteer at a children's charity? It makes me look selfless and civic-minded. What's your plan?" I pulled out a notebook where I had been sketching ideas, approaches, contingencies. Phase 1, infiltration. I get inside the foundation, document everything, understand how it really works. Phase 2, confrontation. I reveal who I am and gauge his reaction. Phase 3, exposure. I use everything I've learned to show the world who he really is. Marcus studied my notes with the same intensity he once brought to structural calculations. "This isn't just about getting revenge, Sophie. If you're right about the financial irregularities, there are real victims here. Kids who aren't getting help they need, donors whose money is being wasted. Then we're not just getting justice for us. We're getting justice for them too." The Vail Foundation occupied a renovated warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures designed to look philanthropic rather than corporate. The lobby featured a wall of photos showing the foundation's work: children reading, playing, learning, growing. It was exactly the kind of place that looked good in grant applications and donor newsletters. The receptionist was a young woman named Amanda who greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm that non-profit employees cultivate like a job skill. "You must be Sophie. Dr. Vail is so excited to meet you. It's wonderful when young people want to give back to their community." Dr. Harrison Vail emerged from his office like a man accustomed to being the center of attention. He was exactly as he appeared in photos, distinguished, well-dressed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from a life largely unmarred by consequences. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm and warm, his smile practiced but convincing. "Sophie Hartwell," he said, and I felt a strange thrill at using my assumed father's name as camouflage. "Amanda tells me you're interested in volunteering with us. What draws you to our mission?" I had practiced this conversation in front of Marcus's bathroom mirror, crafting a persona that would appeal to Dr. Vail's ego while hiding my true purpose. I've been privileged to have a good education and opportunities, I began, letting a note of earnest idealism creep into my voice. I want to help children who haven't had the same advantages. Your foundation's work is exactly what I want to be part of. His smile widened. That's exactly the kind of passion we need. Tell me, what are your plans for college? I'm hoping to study social work, maybe non-profit management. I want to understand how organizations like yours create real change in the world. It was perfect bait, and he took it completely. For the next hour, Dr. Vale gave me a tour of the facility, explaining the Foundation's programs with the fluid expertise of someone who had given this presentation countless times. He showed me the computer lab, 12 outdated machines for 200 children, the tutoring room, staffed entirely by volunteers, and the kitchen, which served snacks, not meals, despite the Foundation's marketing materials. What we do here isn't just about providing services, he explained as we walked through the small gymnasium. We're building relationships, creating trust, showing these children that there are adults who care about their success. His words would have been inspiring if I hadn't known how much money was disappearing into administrative costs while kids made do with second-hand computers and volunteer tutors. But I played my part, asking thoughtful questions and expressing admiration for the Foundation's work. I'd love to have you join our team, Dr. Vale said as the tour concluded. You have exactly the kind of heart this work requires. When can you start? 3 days later, I was sitting in the Foundation's conference room for volunteer orientation, surrounded by college students and retirees who genuinely wanted to help children. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was probably the only person in the room who was there under false pretenses, but I was also the only one who understood how much the Foundation was failing the kids it claimed to serve. My first 2 weeks as a volunteer were spent in the computer lab, helping elementary school children with reading games and basic math programs. The kids were exactly what you'd expect: bright, curious, hungry for attention and guidance. They deserved better than machines that crashed every few minutes and educational software that belonged in a museum. But the volunteer work also gave me access to the Foundation's inner workings. I helped with filing, data entry, and general office tasks that put me in contact with financial documents, donor records, and program reports. Every evening, I went home to Marcus's apartment with phone photos of papers, careful notes about conversations I'd overheard, and a growing understanding of just how corrupt the Foundation had become. The breakthrough came during my 3rd week, when Dr. Vale asked me to help organize his office for an upcoming board meeting. It was a mark of how much he had grown to trust me, this earnest young volunteer who hung on his every word and never asked uncomfortable questions. His office was a monument to his own success: diplomas, awards, photos with politicians and celebrities who had supported the Foundation's work. But it was the file cabinet behind his desk that held the real treasures. While he was in meetings, I photographed bank statements that showed regular transfers from the Foundation's accounts to a personal investment portfolio. I documented expense reports that included family vacations charged as donor cultivation trips and charity events that looked suspiciously like personal entertainment. The most damning evidence was a series of emails between Dr. Vale and his accountant, discussing strategies to minimize the Foundation's actual program spending while maintaining their charity rating. They were literally calculating how little they could spend on children while still maintaining their non-profit status. But it was the personal correspondence that provided the missing piece I needed. In a folder marked confidential, I found copies of legal documents related to various settlement agreements Dr. Vale had signed over the years. NDAs, severance packages, payments made to former employees who had agreed never to discuss their experiences with the Foundation. My mother's name was there, along with 4 other women who had received similar payouts. The pattern was clear: Dr. Vale had a history of inappropriate relationships with female employees, relationships that ended with legal agreements designed to protect his reputation and his marriage. I was photographing the last document when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly closed the file drawer and moved to the other side of the office, pretending to organize the bookshelf. Dr. Vale entered a moment later, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Sophie, you're such a dedicated volunteer. I hope we're not working you too hard." "Not at all," I replied, keeping my voice light and enthusiastic. "I love being here. This work is so important. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne and see the gold wedding ring that represented just one of the lives he had betrayed. You know, Sophie, you remind me of myself when I was young. That same passion for helping others, that same drive to make a difference in the world. The comparison made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to smile. That means so much, coming from you. You're exactly the kind of person I hope to become someday. Have you thought about what you want to do after high school? Because I'd be happy to write recommendation letters, help you network with people in the nonprofit world. Talented young people like you deserve every opportunity to succeed. It was exactly the opening I had been waiting for, the perfect setup for the next phase of my plan. Actually, I said, allowing a note of vulnerability to enter my voice, I was hoping I could talk to you about something personal. Something I've never told anyone before. His expression shifted to one of paternal concern, the practiced look of a man who had built his reputation on caring about troubled youth. Of course, Sophie. My door is always open. Why don't we sit down? We settled into the leather chairs in front of his desk, the same chairs where he had probably convinced hundreds of donors to write large checks for his fake charity work. I took a deep breath, channeling every acting class I had ever taken, every moment of teenage drama I could summon. I've been volunteering here because I know what it's like to grow up without a father, I began, watching his face carefully. My mother was a single parent, and she's never told me who my real father is. She worked for a non-profit when she was young, and something happened that she's never been willing to discuss. Dr. Vale's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Wariness. Recognition, maybe. That must be very difficult, he said, his voice carefully modulated. Family secrets can be painful, especially when they affect your sense of identity. The thing is, I continued, pulling out my phone, I just turned 18. And I was able to access some documents that my mother had sealed. Legal papers, settlement agreements. I found out that her name was Chloe Hartwell, and she used to work for a children's charity 19 years ago. The color drained from Dr. Vale's face so quickly that for a moment I thought he might faint. He gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. I think, I said, meeting his eyes directly, that you might be my father. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before explosions, before buildings collapse, before carefully constructed worlds come tumbling down. Dr. Vale opened his mouth several times, but no sound emerged. When he finally spoke, his voice was a hoarse whisper. Sophie. This is. I look like her, don't I? I pressed, standing up from my chair. My mother, Chloe. I have her eyes, her chin. But I have your nose. Your hands. I noticed it the first day we met, but I thought it was just coincidence. He stood up too, backing away from me as if I were dangerous. You can't be here. This is impossible. I did a DNA test, I lied smoothly. 23andMe, it came back with some interesting family connections, people I'd never heard of. But when I researched them, they all led back to you. Dr. Vale sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. Your mother, she signed agreements. Legal documents. She can't discuss any of this. She didn't tell me anything, I said, which was technically true. I figured it out myself. The question is, what are you going to do about it? He looked up at me, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw him clearly. Not the distinguished philanthropist, not the caring advocate for children, but a frightened man who had spent 19 years believing his secrets were safely buried. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out my phone and placed it on his desk. I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. About my mother, about me, about what really happened 19 years ago. Sophie, you have to understand. I understand plenty, I interrupted, my careful facade finally cracking. I understand that you got my mother pregnant and then threw money at her to make the problem disappear. I understand that while you were building your reputation as someone who protects children, you were abandoning your own child. I understand that another man has spent 18 years paying for your mistakes. Dr. Vale's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and desperation. It wasn't like that. I couldn't, my family, My work, everything I had built would have been destroyed. So instead you destroyed my family. I gave your mother money, a good severance package. I made sure she was taken care of. You made sure she was quiet, I corrected. There's a difference. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out his checkbook, his hands shaking as he uncapped his pen. What will it take? I can give you money for college, help you get started in life. You're my... His voice cracked. You're my daughter. I want to help. I stared at the checkbook, at this man's pathetic attempt to solve a problem he had created with money. You think this is about money? Isn't it? Your mother said you couldn't access your trust fund, that you needed financial help. The mention of my mother caught me off guard. You've been talking to her? She called me after you found out about the DNA test. She was worried about what you might do, what you might say. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. Sophie, please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't have this come out now. The foundation, the award ceremony next week, my family, it would destroy everything. I felt a cold smile spreading across my face. Tell me about the award ceremony. The Colorado Humanitarian Award. It's the biggest honor in the nonprofit world. The ceremony will bring in millions of dollars in new funding, help thousands more children. His voice took on a pleading quality. If this comes out, all of that disappears. The children who need our help will suffer. The children who need help are already suffering, I said, gesturing toward the window that looked out on the modest computer lab. They're suffering because you're stealing from them. Because you're more interested in maintaining your lifestyle than actually helping kids. That's not true. I've seen your financial records, Dr. Vale. I know how much you pay yourself, how much you spend on your retreat center, how little actually reaches the children you claim to serve. I picked up my phone from his desk. I know about the other settlements too. The other women you've paid to keep quiet about your behavior. His face went ashen. You can't prove any of that. I can prove all of it. I held up my phone, showing him the photos I had taken of his files. Bank statements, expense reports, legal settlements, tax filings. I have everything. Dr. Vale slumped in his chair like a man who had just realized his ship was sinking. What do you want from me? I want you to do the right thing for once in your life, I said, my voice steady and cold. I want you to stand up at that award ceremony next week and tell everyone the truth about what kind of man you really are. I can't do that. Then I'll do it for you. The threat hung in the air between us, as sharp and final as a blade. Dr. Vale looked at me with something approaching horror, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. You're serious. Completely. Sophie, please. Think about what you're doing. This will hurt more than just me. My wife, my children, the foundation's work. Your wife deserves to know who she's married to. Your children deserve to know they have a sister. And the foundation's work is a joke. I stood up and walked toward the door. You have until the award ceremony to figure out how you want to handle this. You can tell the truth yourself, or I can tell it for you. But either way, the truth is coming out. I left him sitting in his office, surrounded by his awards and photos and the remnants of a reputation that was about to crumble. The walk to the elevator felt like floating, like the first moment of free fall before gravity takes hold. The award ceremony was held in the grand ballroom of the downtown Marriott, a space designed to make people feel important while they wrote large checks for good causes. The walls were decorated with photos of the Vale Foundation's work, and tables were filled with Denver's philanthropic elite, all there to celebrate Dr. Harrison Vale's lifetime of service to children. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress that made me look older and more serious. My volunteer ID badge got me past security and into the staff area behind the ballroom, where catering staff were making final preparations for the evening's celebration. Marcus was waiting for me in the hotel lobby, dressed in the one good suit he still owned from his old life. He looked nervous but determined, like a man preparing for a battle he never wanted to fight but couldn't avoid. Are you sure about this? He asked as we walked toward the ballroom entrance. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The ceremony began with cocktails and networking, followed by dinner and a series of speeches from local politicians and community leaders, all praising Dr. Vale's tireless work on behalf of disadvantaged youth. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Dr. Vale himself looked distinguished and composed as he worked the room, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. But I caught him glancing in my direction several times, his smile faltering whenever our eyes met. The presentation of the Colorado Humanitarian Award was the evening's climax. Dr. Vale took the stage to thunderous applause, holding the crystal trophy like a symbol of everything he had built through years of careful public relations and strategic charity work. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom sound system. "This award isn't just recognition of my work. It's recognition of what we can accomplish when we come together to protect and nurture the most vulnerable members of our society." He launched into a well-rehearsed speech about the importance of supporting children who had nowhere else to turn, about the responsibility of the fortunate to care for the less fortunate. It was exactly the kind of inspiring rhetoric that had made him famous in non-profit circles. Over the past 20 years, he continued, the Vale Foundation has served thousands of children across Colorado. We've provided safe spaces for learning, nutritious meals, mentorship, and hope. But our work is far from over. I stood up from my table near the back of the ballroom. The movement caught his attention, and his voice faltered for just a moment when he saw me walking toward the stage. "We live in a world where too many children grow up without the support they need," he continued, trying to regain his rhythm. "Without stable homes, without adequate resources, without adults who believe in their potential." I reached the foot of the stage and stopped, looking up at this man who had shaped my entire life through his absence. The ballroom was filled with hundreds of people who saw him as a hero, a selfless advocate for children who had dedicated his life to helping others. "Dr. Vale," I called out, my voice cutting through the murmur of confusion that was starting to ripple through the audience. "Can I ask you a question?" Security guards started moving toward me, but Dr. Vale raised his hand to stop them. His face was pale, but he managed to keep his composure. "Of course," he said, though his voice sounded strained. "What would you like to know? What advice would you give to a young person who just discovered that their father abandoned them before they were even born?" The question hung in the air like a bomb with a long fuse. The audience was silent, unsure whether this was part of the program or something else entirely. Dr. Vale gripped the podium, his knuckles white against the polished wood. That's a very personal question," he managed to say, his voice wavering slightly. "It is personal," I agreed, taking a step closer to the stage. "My name is Sophie Hartwell, 18 years old. And Dr. Vale, you are my biological father." The gasp that went through the ballroom was audible, a collective intake of breath from hundreds of people who had just watched their hero's reputation begin to crumble. Cameras that had been recording the ceremony swiveled toward me, capturing my face as I delivered the words that would end Dr. Vale's carefully constructed life. 19 years ago, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system, Dr. Vale had an affair with my mother, Chloe, who worked at his foundation. When she became pregnant, he paid her to disappear and never contact him again. He abandoned his own child to protect his reputation. Dr. Vale stood frozen at the podium, the award still clutched in his hands. This isn't the time or place." "When is the right time?" I interrupted. "When would it be appropriate to talk about how the man being honored for protecting children abandoned his own daughter? How he's built his fortune on a charity that spends more money on his salary and lifestyle than on the children it claims to serve?" I pulled out a folder from my purse and held it up for everyone to see. "I have the financial records. I have the settlement agreements. I have proof that Dr. Harrison Vale has been stealing from children for years while building his reputation as their protector." The security guards were moving again, but the damage was already done. The audience was buzzing with shock and confusion, phones were recording everything, and Dr. Vale looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, addressing the crowd directly, "you came here tonight to honor a man you believed dedicated his life to helping children. But the truth is, Dr. Vale has spent years helping himself to money meant for children while paying women to stay quiet about his behavior." Dr. Vale finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate plea. "Sophie, please. You don't understand the full situation. Your mother, she made choices too. My mother made the choice to protect me from a man who threatened to destroy her if she told the truth, I shot back. But I'm 18 now, and I can make my own choices. I choose to tell the truth. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed forward, board members stood up from their tables looking stunned, and Dr. Vale's wife, a woman I recognized from photos in his office, was staring at the stage with a look of dawning horror. But I wasn't finished. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, and I was going to make sure everyone understood exactly who Dr. Harrison Vale really was. Dr. Vale talks about providing safe spaces for children, I continued, raising my voice above the growing din, but he couldn't even provide safety for his own child. He talks about adults taking responsibility for vulnerable youth, but he abandoned that responsibility the moment it became inconvenient for him. I looked directly at him, this man whose DNA I carried but who had never been a father to me in any meaningful way. The worst part isn't that you abandoned me. The worst part is that you let another man suffer for 18 years because of your cowardice. Marcus Hartwell lost his business, his house, his entire life paying child support for a daughter who wasn't biologically his, because he was a better father to me in one day than you've been in 18 years. That's when I saw Marcus pushing through the crowd toward the stage. His face was grim but determined, and when he reached me, he put his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than words. Dr. Vale, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise of the ballroom. I think it's time you and I had a conversation. The confrontation between the two men who had unknowingly shared the role of father in my life was electric with tension. Dr. Vale looked down at Marcus with a mixture of fear and guilt, while Marcus stared back with the quiet anger of a man who had been wronged for nearly 2 decades. I don't have anything to say to you, Dr. Vale said, but his voice lacked conviction. You have plenty to say, Marcus replied. Starting with an apology for the life you stole from me and the daughter you abandoned. Dr. Vale's composure finally cracked completely. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was young, I made mistakes. You weren't young, I interjected. You were 39 years old, married, with children of your own. You knew exactly what you were doing when you seduced my mother and then threw money at her to make the problem disappear. The security guards finally reached us, but they seemed unsure of what to do. The evening's honoree was at the center of a scandal that was unfolding in real time, and there was no protocol for handling this kind of public revelation. Dr. Vale's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who had been sitting at the head table, pushed through the crowd toward the stage. Dr. Vale, don't say anything else. We need to handle this privately. But it was too late for private handling. The story was already out there, captured on dozens of phones and cameras, spreading through social media even as we stood in that ballroom. The careful reputation Dr. Vale had built over decades was crumbling in minutes. The Foundation's board will be conducting a full investigation, called out a woman I recognized as the board chairperson. All programs and financial practices will be reviewed immediately. Dr. Vale looked out at the audience, at the hundreds of people who had come to celebrate his work and were now witnessing his downfall. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of 18 years of lies had finally become too much to bear. Sophie, he said, his voice barely audible over the commotion. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back my childhood, I replied. Sorry doesn't give Marcus back his life. And sorry doesn't help the children your foundation has been failing. The evening that was supposed to be Dr. Vale's greatest triumph had become his ultimate humiliation. As security finally escorted us out of the ballroom, I caught a glimpse of his wife approaching the stage with tears in her eyes and fury on her face. The aftermath came swiftly and decisively. Within 48 hours, Dr. Vale had resigned from the foundation in disgrace. His wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody of their 2 children. The Colorado Attorney General's office announced an investigation into the foundation's financial practices. Local news picked up the story, then national outlets. Humanitarian Award winner exposed as deadbeat dad and charity fraud became the headline that defined Dr. Vale's legacy. The foundation's major donors pulled their funding, corporate sponsors ended their partnerships, and the retreat center in Aspen was put up for sale to pay legal fees. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks later, when Marcus received a call from Dr. Vale's lawyer. They were prepared to offer a settlement reimbursement for 18 years of child support payments, plus interest and damages for the emotional distress caused by the fraud. "It's not about the money," Marcus told me as we sat in his apartment, reviewing the settlement offer. "But it's acknowledgement that what happened to us was wrong." I looked at the figure on the legal document, enough money to pay off Marcus's debts, help him restart his architectural practice, and fund my college education at any school I chose. It was justice, finally, but it felt hollow without the relationship that should have been. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Going public the way you did?" I thought about the question carefully. The public humiliation of Dr. Vale had been swift and thorough, but it had also revealed his crimes to people who could do something about them. The foundation was being restructured under new leadership, with oversight that would ensure donations actually reached the children who needed them. "No," I said finally. He had 18 years to do the right thing. He chose to protect himself instead of taking responsibility for his actions. Some people only learn when the consequences become unavoidable. 6 months later, I was sitting in the student center at MIT, where I was studying engineering just like Marcus had always dreamed. The settlement money had made it possible, but more importantly, I had Marcus's support and guidance as I navigated my first semester. Dr. Harrison Vale had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for embezzlement and tax fraud. His foundation had been dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to legitimate children's charities. His family had moved away from Colorado, trying to rebuild their lives away from the scandal that had consumed their old ones. My mother had struggled with the aftermath of the revelation, but she was in therapy now, working to understand how her fear had shaped so many destructive choices. She was also working to rebuild her relationship with both Marcus and me, something that would take time but wasn't impossible. The most important change, though, was in my relationship with Marcus. The legal fiction that had defined our connection for so long had been replaced by something more honest and more meaningful. He wasn't my biological father, but he was my dad in every way that mattered. DNA had brought Dr. Vale and me together, but love and commitment had made Marcus my true parent. I picked up my phone and called him, something I could do anytime now without worrying about custody schedules or supervised visits. "Hey, Dad," I said when he answered. "Hey, kiddo. How was your calculus exam?" "Aced it," I replied, grinning at the pride in his voice. "Turns out I inherited your math skills after all." "Damn right you did," he said, laughing. "Those come from 18 years of homework help, not genetics." As I hung up the phone and walked across campus toward my next class, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. I had set out to get revenge on a man who had abandoned me, and in the process, I had discovered what it really meant to be part of a family. The truth had been painful, complicated, and messy, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and where I came from. I was Sophie Hartwell, daughter of Marcus Hartwell, student at MIT, and architect of my own justice. The DNA test that had started this entire journey had been meant to unlock my family's past. Instead, it had unlocked my future, a future built not on lies and secrets, but on truth, accountability, and the understanding that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. Dr. Vale had thought that money could solve any problem, that silence could be bought and consequences could be avoided indefinitely. He learned, too late, that some debts can never be paid with cash. The debt of abandonment, the debt of cowardice, the debt of putting reputation over responsibility, those debts can only be paid with truth. And in the end, the truth had set us all free.